So we bunny hopped around a couple of different themes and looked at some common threads, which includes struggling through the diversity of the rural. So how do you sort of bring everyone to the table and be receptive of just how many differences there are between folks in communities and even within specific families and different generations. So that is something that is deeply felt within this group. Some of the options for dealing with that is around advocacy issues, having multiple points of entry. So we had a great example of opposition of the tar sands and different reasons that folks got involved on that issue, which range from climate change to salmon to, energy independence and other issues. So that was one example there that was very illustrative. We talked a lot about funding and how we can begin to communicate with funders and hopefully help them value some of these things that we've all been covering today, the feelings, the relationship building, the quality of relationships, the creation and maintenance of trust, and how we can communicate that to ways that will help funders really understand and value this type of work that isn't really measured, doesn't fit into a nice box of we restored 200 acres. And how we might be able to do that not only with funders, but then encourage funders to do that with others, especially if you have a positive experience with a funder who seems really receptive to trying to understand and value these components of our work. And we also talked through scope and scale and how capacity building in rural areas can be a very long process. Many folks are already overcommitted and wearing multiple hats, and it can be tough to really find someone from within that community to get engaged in this kind of work that's not already overcommitted. And so looking at youth engagement and trying to cultivate future leaders is one strategy. And the same thing with trying to deal with the urgency of issues, understanding that you have to go slow to go fast. And eventually, if you stay going slow long enough, you might get to a point where you build a cohesive network of folks who can respond with urgency when needed. So those are some of the things that we moved through, and we're eager to hear what other folks have to share.
Thank you, Angelina. Deb, you and your team want to report out some thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to our note taker, Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'd say the key takeaway from our conversation was that when working with rural, I just got a message from Zoom, so I stopped to make sure. Everybody can hear me? Okay, great. So the key takeaway from our group was that when working with rural communities, it's important that doing that work authentically means not just including and listening to their voices so that you have the social license or permission to operate in their space, but it means actually valuing and recognizing the contributions that they make to informing your priorities and strategies for achieving the work, and really not just making a space that's comfortable for them and including them as a token member on your board or in your initiatives, but actually incorporating their experiences and perspectives into your own thinking and into the objectives of your mission. And often that includes strategies such as the ones Angelina talked about at the beginning in the presentation of actually embedding yourself in the community, whether that's actually moving there or when you're going there, spending time, not just coming in for the meeting and parachuting in and out, but actually spending time in the grocery store, in the coffee shop, at the soccer games, however you can to get to know the people that live there and come to understand the sense of place that they have. And that this is a challenge that's similar to bridging that rural-urban divide as well, that it is something that we'll need to figure out how to communicate to rural communities that we work with, and also with our funders as well, as to why that approach is important, and how you know, it's worth expending financial resources on it, even if it doesn't produce the same outcomes and metrics that they're used to seeing, or on the same timeline that they're used to seeing.
Thank you so much, Anna. Lots of good points. Ben, do you and your team have anything to share?
Katie's going to dive in.
So, yeah. And if I don't cover everything, Ben, please feel free to chime in. So we kind of, as we talked about opportunities and challenges and what we were inspired by this afternoon, kind of 3 distinct questions emerged. How do we build and scale relationships? How do we change funders' perspectives around what it means to invest in relationship building? And what is the burden to rural communities of conservation? And how do we address that? And to be conscious of time, the question about funders, I think Angelina covered pretty well. It's a challenge to meaningfully convey to funders that relationship building and the time and the resources that takes is worth investing in. One strategy that we discussed to kind of have a deliverable that would satisfy both parties is a methodology for relationship building, and lessons learned and ideas about how those lessons and their work could be scaled, and how that has appealed to funders like the NSF as something that counts as a deliverable. We talked a lot about what it means to scale relationship and relationship building to a few solutions for that were networks, and building on grassroots movements, like having volunteers in the communities that you're working with, developing archetypes and case studies around specific kinds of communities. Obviously, there's no silver bullet, but there can be reliable toolboxes developed for communities based on certain characteristics and then used in similar places or scaled up. Apologies for my cat. And then we also kind of just talked about different ways that kind of the rural burden manifests itself in different communities. Not so much a solutions-oriented conversation there, but just about the different ways that that plays out.
Sounds good. Lots of good ideas. And hi, Kitty. All right. Teresa and Gary, I think you guys were in a group together. Anyone from your team want to report out?
Yeah, and actually Zoe, who is our note taker, is going to share our feedback.
Hi, everybody. We also had a lot of similar points to, it seems like, what other groups talked about. We primarily focused on funding as well. And so we started the conversation around how funders are stuck in their own system that's not responsive to the work that's being done on the ground. And so we need to change the culture of those funders and how deliverables are being developed and received and valued by those funding organizations. And so another piece that we talked about is building relationships within the communities and how that has to come from within the community itself. So sponsoring full-time positions, even including field technicians that are local to that area, and not focusing on or supporting as much what we were calling grant grabbers that are coming in from the outside. So making sure that we're supporting local communities with local dollars. Helping the community to invest in themselves, hopefully you can still hear me. My internet connection is challenging. So, funding 2 to 3 positions in the community to offer a long-term investment that creates a pipeline in that community. And then the last piece that hasn't been discussed really is a really robust conversation that we had about occupying white space and people within communities feeling like they're sort of oscillating that divide between representing their community and representing the conservation space. And so when you look at conservation, there's not much diversity, there's a lot of privilege, and even the opportunity to engage in this conversation, Simon said, it is a privilege in and of itself. So we really need to focus on looking at the population structures of the areas that we're working in, and making sure that we're speaking with and representing and empowering the individuals that are going to be the key drivers of change, and the best folks to represent what the challenges are as well.
Thank you, Zoe. And last but not least, Robert.
So we had a great conversation, lots of themes that others have covered, which I'm assuming is probably a reassuring thing. And I would just start off by saying I was an idiot. I forgot to do a note taker, so I'm the note taker. Lots of conversation early on about some of the tension that other folks have talked about, of the need to invest time in developing these relationships, and some of the challenges that creates with funders, both either not having enough resources or a lack of appreciation for the need to invest in relationships in rural communities. An interesting note about sort of some of the time pressure, both a lot of times we're on a time frame to get something done, and so there's a push to do something rapidly, even as you need to create those relationships. Some good comments about, even for folks in the conservation community that might be embedded within a community, they're still sometimes perceived as outsiders. That was interesting. Lots of conversation about the need for trust, building trust, opportunities to use land grant universities or other partners to strengthen those relationships. Talked about kind of landowner stewardship ethic and the opportunity to use that to sort of open doors to longer term relationships that might yield greater benefits. We talked a little bit, quite a lot at the end around political polarization and how to, sort of how that manifests itself on the ground, but also ways to kind of work through it. We talked about that in the context of wildlife corridors and some conservation issues. Really good comments about sort of using relationships to build knowledge about issues and allowing stakeholders to kind of arrive at a place themselves, even if you have an idea what the solution set is early on. And then a kind of an interesting tangent at the end about the fact that in COVID, there are a lot of people moving to rural, and that might in fact change some of these dynamics. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Robert. All right, with that, Beth and our great graphic recorder, Carrie, are going to take us through the rest of the day.
Great. Thank you, Dominique. And what a remarkable group of people this is. It's really been interesting and fun and a learning experience every time I feel like I talk to all of you. So thank you again for joining us today. I was just going to go through a few of the themes we heard today. And I think the breakout sort of did that. So I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add, but a few of the things that caught me or that really seemed to be thematic throughout comments, whether they be from the folks on the ground or the folks doing research or both, and the breakouts, is that comment early on that work in rural communities and with tribes happens at the speed of trust. I thought that was an eloquent way of stating the fact that relationships are central to all of this work. It really is critical, and that there's not a single rural. There's no single representative in any community or in any subgroup. And so that also points to the importance of networks and identifying aligned goals within communities. I think also the fact that communication, it's not about messaging. I thought that phrasing was very helpful for both Ben and Robert. It's not about phrasing, it's about relevance and about authentic engagement. I think the fact that many rural folks have a strong stewardship and environmental ethic but distrust the federal government is another theme we heard a lot of, that state government approaches might sometimes be warranted, that folks aren't against science but a trusted messenger is important, that traditional conservation groups often aren't it, and where communities are often not approached or not met with on a regular basis when folks sort of parachute in, trying to get their agenda met. It's bound to be met with suspicion, and probably rightly so. That echoed for me with a lot of things I've heard talking with the Western Landowners Alliance as well. Let's see, the importance to recognize and incorporate the diversity of rural populations. People started listing all the different groups, and I thought about the interesting niche that is the Somali community working in meatpacking plants all over the rural US, which is its own kind of phenomenon, but there are a lot of those. The fact that climate change approaches, this was very much Robert's messaging, often that it's a polarizing issue. It's a polarizing phrase, but that if you approach it through natural solutions, forest stewardship, agriculture, you know, that may be an entry point. I think in some of the discussions that happened around Ben's points, there was and I'm talking about in the chat, there was sort of a conversation about what would constitute success in rural community transformation, and is it about retaining quality of life, and who decides and who's engaged in that definition of success, and that there may be inflection points, for instance, around the recent wildfires that really tragically destroyed towns in Oregon. What, you know, does investment in rebuilding come with an opportunity to think through some of these issues in a new way and have conversations about them? That's a lot of it. That policy doesn't equal regulation. The importance of recruiting and hiring locally, and I've experienced this directly myself, that groups don't come with a savior complex, that they come, you know, if they're lucky, they'll get dinner invitations, to Angelina's point, and that parachuting in is almost never a workable strategy. And related to that, the importance, I think, of cultural humility and self-awareness. So all of those things add up to a lot of wisdom and experience, and thoughtful professionals to approach conservation and other work in rural America. I'm interested in feedback from you all about, and maybe in the chat to start with, but it also could be for a little further discussion about what further resources or conversations might be helpful. And if you could make a recommendation to the next administration, no matter who that next administration might be, what would be the top 3 priorities at this point, given the challenges in the rural West, both economic and environmental? How and where can federal policy either support state policy or support other approaches that might help begin to address some of the challenges that rural America is facing? And particularly the rural West, I think, is what we've been talking about today. Anything else?
No, I think that covered it really well between your remarks and all of the report outs. I do want to give Carrie Frickman, our graphic recorder we've been spotlighting, is just sharing a little bit of the work that she's been doing, those same themes seen graphically. We know it's a little hard to see on your computer, but we will be sharing it out both in a PDF form as well as a short video that shows this kind of growing over the day and evolving as you all shared so many great resources, information, and experiences. So she's kind of going through that. Beth or any of our presenters, any final remarks? Beth, you want to share a little bit about what we'll share after the event in the coming days?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. We will be following up with a recording of today's event, and we hope you'll share that with your colleagues and anyone else you think might be interested. There were a number of people who were on the wait list today who did not make it, and also I think people who registered who didn't make it. So we'll be sharing that out with everyone who was registered, and also on our website. We will share today's graphic recording And we hope you'll stay in touch and share this with your friends and colleagues. And if there are any other areas where you think, you know, an entity like the Salazar Center might be helpful in convening or exploring ideas, I hope you'll let us know.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone, and particularly a big thank you to all of our wonderful presenters for their experiences and research today. It was just a really enlightening day, and really appreciated all the remarks. And I know that many people had great discussions based on that. We will also share the chat, and we have a list of all the attendees. So if you said that we could share your email, we will be sharing that by link as well. Beth, any final things?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat, and Ben asks, will Salazar Center seek to continue to build and foster a network around rural engagement? And I hope we can. I think it's, you know, we only want to work where there's a value add. We don't want to compete with existing efforts, but we'd like to. We have found that in some cases we're able to convene folks in a way that might not otherwise have happened. And so we will continue those conversations. We may reach out to you for ideas. Our colleagues at Colorado State University in the collaborative conservation arena have also been doing a lot of interesting work related to capacity in rural communities. And so I think we'll be looking at all those options. And I know it really is a central issue for Secretary Salazar, who continues to really you know, be at the heart of our program, even though he's not officially employed by the center, but he did start the thing. And so we try to keep him, you know, as engaged as possible because he's a wonderful resource. So Ben, would love to keep talking with you about that as well, and with all of you. There are a number of other great comments in the group chat, and rather than read them, I'll just let you all refer to that. We will, tell me, Dominique, when we share the recording of this, does it include the chat?
We'll include the chat separately.
Okay, wonderful, because there are a lot of great resources in there.
Wonderful.
Finally, our urban symposium is tomorrow, kind of going to the other end of the spectrum of the things we work on. Tomorrow will be our symposium on urban green space, climate resilience, and equity. There's still time to sign up if you want to. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, including Representative Deb Haaland from Albuquerque, city leaders from Canada, US, and Mexico, several national funders, just a really fantastic lineup. So hope you'll consider joining that. And then otherwise, you can sign up for our regular updates on the Salazar Center website and be notified about upcoming webinars and other events. So thanks again so much for joining us. Hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you all. Have a good one.